Imagine a man who stood up to kings, faced down hundreds of false prophets, called fire down from the sky, and had an ending like no one else ever did. He was taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot, without ever tasting death. Sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? But this is the real story of Elijah, one of the greatest prophets in the Bible. What most people don't realize is that his journey was full of mysteries, challenges, and supernatural events that still leave scholars and believers in awe to this day. But here's the big question. Did the Bible really tell us everything about Elijah? Are there hidden secrets in this story that could completely change the way you see God's plan for humanity? And for your own life? How did one ordinary man manage to take on a corrupt system and come out victorious? What did he have that made him so powerful? And maybe the most mind-blowing part, what really happened after he was taken up to heaven? If you think you already know this story, get ready to be amazed. Today, we're diving deep into the most incredible moments of Elijah's life and his successor Elisha to uncover what their journey can teach us. But be warned, some truths run deeper than you might expect. Elijah, the Tishbite, emerged during a time of deep spiritual darkness in Israel. The people had turned away from their devotion to God, giving in to idolatry promoted by King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. But Elijah wasn't just any man. He was a prophet chosen by God himself to challenge corruption and restore true faith. With bold words and an unshakable mission, Elijah stood before Ahab and declared that a great drought would come upon the land, a divine judgment for the people's rebellion. This was just the beginning of a journey filled with miracles, confrontations, and unwavering faith. During the 3-year drought, Elijah was sustained by divine provision. God commanded ravens to bring him bread and meat by the brook of Chariot, proving that those who trust in the Lord are never abandoned. Later, he was sent to Zarephath, where he met a widow on the brink of starvation. There, God performed a miracle through the prophet. The woman's flour and oil never ran out for the entire duration of the drought. Day after day, God's faithfulness was evident, and Elijah became a living symbol of divine provision. But his mission was about more than just survival. Elijah was an instrument of divine justice and a spiritual guide for the nation. He challenged kings, confronted false gods, and showed the people that there was only one path to true life. His boldness didn't come from himself, but from his absolute certainty that God always fulfills his promises. And if there's one thing his story teaches us, it's that faithfulness to God, even in the darkest times, always paves the way for extraordinary miracles. Because the greatest showdown of his life was still ahead. Elijah's faith wasn't just theoretical, it was alive, proven through extraordinary miracles. During the 3-year drought, he experienced divine provision in unimaginable ways. First, by the brook of Chariot, where ravens brought him food daily, a clear sign that God can use any means to sustain his servants. Then in Zarephath, when a widow on the brink of death received the prophet's visit and witnessed her last bit of flour and oil miraculously replenished without end. That miracle wasn't just an act of mercy. It was a powerful lesson. When you fully trust in God, scarcity never has the final word. But Elijah didn't just witness miracles. He performed them with boldness. One of the most astonishing cases happened when the widow's son died. Faced with a mother's despair, Elijah refused to accept tragedy as the final outcome. He went up to the room, prayed fervently, and, against all odds, watched the child come back to life. This was the first resurrection recorded in the Bible, proving that prophetic authority wasn't just about words. It could reach into the impossible. Elijah was a vessel of divine power, and his unshakable faith made the supernatural reality. These miracles weren't just displays of power. They were invitations for the people to return to God. Elijah knew that visible signs could awaken faith. But true transformation comes from obedience and a daily commitment to the Creator. And that faith was about to be tested in the most epic showdown of his life, where fire from heaven would decide who the true God really was. The decisive moment had arrived. Elijah, alone, against 450 prophets of Baal. The stage for this epic showdown? Mount Carmel. Israel was torn between worshiping the true God and the idolatry promoted by Ahab and Jezebel. Elijah threw down the challenge. Each side would offer sacrifice, and the God who answered with fire would be the one true God. The prophets of Baal began their rituals. They cried out, danced, shouted, and even cut themselves. But nothing happened. The silence was deafening. And Elijah, with unshakable confidence, even mocked them. Maybe Baal is sleeping? When it was Elijah's turn, he did something unexpected. He ordered the altar to be drenched in water, so much that everything was completely soaked. From a human perspective, it was impossible for any fire to ignite there. But Elijah wasn't relying on human logic. He was relying on God's faithfulness. He lifted his voice in prayer, and then the impossible happened. Fire rained down from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water around it. The response was so overwhelming that the people fell to their knees, recognizing that the Lord was the one true God. The false prophets, now exposed, were executed, bringing an end to the great deception of idolatry. This wasn't just a dramatic display of divine power. It was a turning point for Israel. Elijah proved that when it comes to faithfulness to God, there is no middle ground. You're either with him or against him. But the prophet knew the battle was far from over. Idolatry wouldn't give up so easily, and Jezebel, furious at what had just happened, was about to unleash her revenge. Mount Carmel still carried the scent of smoke when Elijah climbed to its peak for another challenge, one invisible to human eyes, bringing back the rain that had been withheld for 3 years. While King Ahab descended to celebrate the victory, Elijah fell to the ground, his face between his knees, and began to pray fervently. He knew the drought wouldn't end by mere human decree. It required divine intervention. 7 times he sent his servant to look at the horizon, and 6 times the answer was the same: nothing. But Elijah didn't give up. On the 7th time, a small cloud appeared, no bigger than a man's hand. To ordinary eyes, it was insignificant. To Elijah, it was proof that God was already at work. The prophet immediately sent word to Ahab, "Get ready, because the rain is coming." The sky, once clear and dry, quickly filled with dark clouds. The wind picked up, and within moments, a mighty storm poured down on the land, breaking the 3-year drought. Elijah's prayer wasn't just an empty ritual. It was a persistent cry filled with faith. He didn't see the answer immediately, but he knew God was working long before any visible sign appeared. And that's one of the greatest lessons from this moment. Those who trust in God pray before they see, act before they feel, and prepare before the blessing arrives. But what happened next was even more astonishing. Moved by the Spirit of the Lord, Elijah outran Ahab's chariot, covering miles with supernatural speed. It was a powerful symbol. Those who walk with God always go further. Yet, even this miracle wouldn't be enough to soften the hardened heart of Queen Jezebel. The real battle was just beginning. The challenge was no longer just bringing rain to the land, but facing the storm of threats that was about to fall upon him. The victory on Mount Carmel and the return of the rain didn't mean the battle was over. Jezebel, furious over the humiliation of her prophets of Baal, vowed revenge against Elijah. And the queen was not one to make empty threats. When she made a promise, she fulfilled it. The message reached the prophet like a death sentence. Within 24 hours, he would be dead. And the same man who stood against hundreds of prophets and called fire from heaven now felt the crushing weight of fear. Elijah fled to the wilderness, exhausted and discouraged. He sat under a broom tree and, in a moment of weakness, asked God to take his life. Like so many who face intense spiritual battles, he reached a breaking point, believing he was alone, that everything had been in vain. But God never abandons his own. In the midst of the crisis, Elijah received divine care. An angel appeared, bringing bread and water, strengthening him for the journey ahead, a journey that would take him to Mount Horeb, the very place where Moses had heard the voice of God centuries before. There, Elijah had a profound encounter with the Lord. First came a mighty wind, then an earthquake, and after that, a fire. Grand, powerful signs, but God was not in them. Then, a gentle whisper filled the air, and in that moment, Elijah understood God doesn't always reveal himself in dramatic ways. Sometimes he speaks in the calm, in the silence, in the stillness. But his mission wasn't over. God commanded Elijah to return, anoint new leaders, and prepare a successor, Elisha. The prophet had been a powerful instrument in confronting Ahab and Jezebel, but his journey had continued through another, Elijah realized that God's plan never depends on just one man. He always prepares the next generation to carry on the mission. And so, a new chapter began, with the arrival of the one who would receive a double portion of his spirit. After years of confronting corrupt kings, challenging idolatry, and performing miracles that proved God's sovereignty, Elijah knew his time was coming to an end. But his departure would be anything but ordinary. Unlike any other man, he would not taste death. His final act on earth was to walk with his disciple Elisha, testing his resolve until the very last moment. At each city they passed, Elijah would say, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to another place." But Elisha, determined, always responded, "I will not leave you." This wasn't just a test of loyalty. It was preparation for prophetic succession. Elisha had to prove he was ready to carry the mantle. When they reached the Jordan River, Elijah performed one last miracle. He struck the water with his cloak, and the river parted, allowing them to cross on dry ground, just as Moses had done in the past. On the other side, Elijah asked a question that would change Elisha's destiny. "Ask me what you want before I am taken from you." Without hesitation, Elisha made a bold request. "I want a double portion of your spirit." It was a daring ask, but it showed his deep desire to continue the mission with even greater intensity. Elijah knew the spiritual inheritance was not his to give, but he replied, "If you see me when I am taken, it will be yours." And then the impossible happened. Suddenly, a chariot of fire descended from the heavens, separating the two. A whirlwind enveloped Elijah, and he was taken up into the sky, never experiencing death. Stunned, Elisha tore his clothes in mourning, but then he saw something left behind, Elijah's cloak. He picked it up and returned to the Jordan. Now, it was his turn to see if he had truly received the anointing. He struck the waters and cried out, "Where's the God of Elijah?" And once again, the waters parted. The ministry of Israel's greatest prophet had ended, but the story was far from over. A new era was beginning, and Elisha would carry the mission forward with even greater power. With Elijah's mantle in his hands and a double portion of the prophetic spirit upon him, Elisha stepped into his new mission. But how would he prove to the people that he was indeed God's chosen successor? His first act was to repeat Elijah's last miracle. He struck the Jordan River, and the waters parted before him. This was more than just a supernatural display. It was a confirmation that the same God who had been with Elijah was now with Elisha. The sons of the prophets, watching from a distance, immediately recognized it. The spirit of Elijah rests upon Elisha. The prophetic succession was now confirmed. But Elisha didn't just inherit Elijah's authority. He also inherited the responsibility of guiding Israel through difficult times. His miracles began to multiply, proving that God was still in control of history. He purified the contaminated waters of Jericho, turned a pot of poisoned stew into safe food, multiplied a widow's oil to save her from slavery, and healed Naaman, the Syrian commander of leprosy. Each miracle carried a lesson. God is not limited to grand public manifestations. He also cares about the details of his people's lives. His provision never fails for those who trust in him. Elisha became a spiritual mentor to kings and nations, advising rulers and revealing God's plans. But his mission went beyond what the eye could see. He didn't just perform great works. He passed on a spiritual legacy. Just as he had received from Elijah, Elisha would also train the next generation. Because the true strength of a prophet is not just in what he accomplishes during his lifetime, but in the legacy he leaves for those who come after. And this story, filled with miracles and deep lessons, still echoes to this day. Now that you've walked through the incredible journey of Elijah and Elisha, one question remains. What does this story mean for you? Elijah wasn't some superhuman. He was just a man who chose to trust God completely, even when everything seemed impossible. He stood up to kings, challenged an entire nation, and proved that faithfulness to God opens the door to the supernatural. And what about you? Are you willing to live out a faith that transforms realities? Maybe you're going through a season of drought in your life, whether spiritual, emotional, or even financial. But Elijah's story teaches us that when we pray with faith and persistence, the rain always comes. Are you ready to seek that transformation? And even more, are you learning from those who came before you, just like Elisha learned from Elijah? Who are your spiritual mentors? Believe me, the path to a stronger, purpose-filled life is built by learning from those who have already walked the journey. If the story impacted you, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep going on this journey of discovery. There is still so much to uncover about the secrets of the Bible, and I promise you, the next revelations might be even more surprising than you can imagine.